as you are aware, is a large problem. It's hard to define it completely and cohesively. We wanted to scope our approach to start to focus on the highest severity of harm. We focused on 3 areas: manipulated media, which you mentioned, civic integrity around the election specifically, and public health specifically around COVID. We wanted to make sure that our resources that we have the greatest impact on where we believed the greatest severity of harm is going to be. Our policies are living documents. They will evolve. We will add to them. But we thought it important that we focus our energies and prioritize the work as much as we could.
Well, Mr. Dorsey, and I'll close with this. I cannot think of a greater harm than climate change, which is transforming literally our planet and causing harm to our entire world. I think we're experiencing significant harm as we speak. I recognize the pandemic and misinformation about COVID-19, manipulated media also cause harm, but I'd urge you to reconsider that, because helping to disseminate climate denialism, in my view, further facilitates and accelerates one of the greatest existential threats to our world. So, and thank you to both of our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey, thank you both for being here with us today virtually and for your commitment to constantly improving the way your platforms are serving people across the country. There has been a lot of talk today. Many of us have been listening from our offices or online about the censorship of ideas and news on your platforms. And these are the things that have been at the forefront of Americans' minds in the lead up to the election, as well as the weeks since our 2020 general election. And, the people that I hear from, of course, believe that conservatives were wrongfully being silenced, while those on the left that were given basically free reign of your platforms. And one of the points of contention that is often brought up is that you do recruit heavily from California, which leads to your employee base skewing quite heavily to the left. So my first question is for both of you. Do you have concerns about your ability to monitor disinformation on both sides of the political aisle equally, given that the majority of your employees typically do lean towards the more progressive side? And again, to both of you, have you taken any steps then at all to make your employee base more representative of the country as a whole when it comes to political affiliation? And Mr. Zuckerberg, if we could start with you, please.
Thank you, Senator. I think that this is those are both really important topics. In terms of assessing what is misinformation, I think it's important that we don't become the deciders on everything that is true or false ourselves, which is why we've tried to build a program of independent fact checkers that we can work with on this. And those fact checkers are accredited not by us, but by the Independent Pointer Institute for Journalism as part of the International Fact Checking Network. And it includes fact checkers that I think span the political spectrum, as well as I think the majority of them who would call themselves apolitical. So we've tried to address the issue of making sure that there isn't a bias in our actions by actually having us not be the deciders on that type of content ourselves. And to your second question about taking steps to diversify the employee base, this is a sensitive area in that I don't think it would be appropriate for us to ask people on the way in as they were interviewing what their political affiliation is, which of course makes it hard to know
And I think the tools are in a state where we can do that more easily. We've obviously been forced to do it with COVID. And I don't think it's a state that we will return from. With the days of having one centralized massive corporate headquarter in any one particular city are certainly over for us, at least, and I think many other entrepreneurs starting companies today.
Yeah, very good. I really appreciate that, and I think that COVID has taught us all a very important lesson, and for those to be able to work remotely, I think you will find greater diversity in thought, which is very important, I think, for the types of platforms that you both represent. Now, I'd like to move on to an entirely different topic, and since I began my career here in the Senate, I have been committed to, of course, protecting those who need it most, and folks, our children are the most in need, and it's our job as lawmakers to respond to the ongoing threats against them. And social media has created a whole new world for all of us, and it can help us share that information and resources with the public about human trafficking and child exploitation, and it can also help us keep track of sexual predators and ensure our children are safe from those known threats. And in fact, I've been working on legislation that would help update what information sexual predators have to provide about their online identities. And as we all know, however, social media can also be incredibly harmful. Child sexual abuse material, CSAM, is present on nearly every single social media platform that exists. And in such polarized times, I am grateful that it is this subject that we do find, it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, we can come together to find solutions for this issue. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I know that you and I touched upon this briefly last week when we spoke over the phone, and I do hope, Mr. Dorsey, that you also share Mr. Zuckerberg's commitment to fighting these types of issues on your platforms. So just very briefly here, as I'm running out of time, but Mr. Zuckerberg, I do understand that Facebook is planning to outfit Facebook Messenger with end-to-end encryption. And how do you hope to prevent the dissemination of child sexual abuse material if neither law enforcement nor you can access that messenger data? Is there some sort of apparatus that you will have in place that can help law enforcement with those situations? And then Mr. Dorsey, will go to you next as well.
Senator, thank you for this. I think you're right on every count in what you just said. Both that child sexual exploitation is one of the gravest threats that we focus the most on, and it is also an area that will face new challenges as we move to end-to-end encryption across our messaging systems. Of course, the reason why we're moving to encryption is because people want greater privacy and security in their messaging systems, and over time are choosing systems that can provide them more privacy and security, and that's something that I think it makes sense for us to offer. I think encryption broadly is good, but it is going to mean that we're going to need to find and develop some new tactics. A lot of what we have found around the best ways to identify bad actors on our system is not actually by looking at the specific content itself, but by looking at patterns of activity and where is it that a group or a person is not behaving in the way that a normal person would, so you can flag and review that. And we've grown increasingly sophisticated at that. That goes across the foreign interference prevention work that we do, and it also will be a factor here. And I'd be happy to follow up in more detail on what we have planned. But overall, I would say that this is something that we're very focused on, and I agree with your concern.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Dorsey, you as well. So those that are on Twitter, making sure that law enforcement would have access, if at all possible. If you could give me an overview of that, please.
Yeah, child exploitation is absolutely terrible, and we don't tolerate it on our service at all. We regularly work with law enforcement to address anything that we see. inclusive of the patterns that Mark has mentioned. The majority of Twitter is public, so we don't have as much activity in private channels. So it's a different approach, but it's still, we still see the same activity, and it's one of our highest priorities in terms of the severity of harm.
Thank you both very much for being accessible to us today. I truly appreciate your input, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Zuckerberg, I really want to appreciate what Facebook has done in the area of sexual exploitation of children. Y'all have done a very good job of trying to help law enforcement in that area. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, for the second time in 3 weeks, you've been called before the Senate committee so my Republican colleagues can beat you up over claims that your platforms are supposedly biased against conservatives. The fact of the matter is that these allegations are completely baseless. Everyone who has systematically looked at the content of social media, from Media Matters to the Cato Institute to former Republican Senator John Kyle, has found absolutely no evidence of anti-conservative bias. And data from CrowdTangle show that far-right content from the likes of Fox News, Ben Shapiro, David Bongino dominates the daily top 10 most engaged pages on Facebook. So all of these allegations about the fact that you hire or all of your employees are left of center is relevant of nothing. Certainly not relevant of some sort of anti-conservative bias in terms of your content moderation. So the way I see it, this hearing is a transparent effort by my Republican colleagues to work the refs. And unfortunately, in my view, it is working. 2 weeks ago, the Washington Post reported that Facebook has bent over backwards to avoid claims that it was biased against conservatives. And it removed a strike against Donald Trump Jr.'s Instagram account that would have penalized him as a repeat offender. Apparently, one of several strikes removed from the accounts of Trump family members. Pro-Trump super PAC American First Action was allowed to post material rated false by Facebook's third-party fact checkers without penalty. And these are just a few examples. And they are nothing new. In 2019, Facebook included Breitbart, a website described by its co-founder as a platform for the alt-right, as one of its trusted news sources. And early in 2019, Facebook selected the Daily Caller, another site with white nationalist ties, to be one of its third-party fact checkers. And the Wall Street Journal has reported how Joel Kaplan, former Deputy Chief of Staff to George W. Bush, stopped changes designed to make Facebook's algorithms less divisive because the changes would have disproportionately affected conservative users and publishers, according to Kaplan. So Mr. Zuckerberg, you founded Facebook, a company with a market capitalization of approximately $80 billion, and you control a majority share of the company's voting stock. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I'm really wondering at what point you will stop giving in to baseless claims of anti-conservative bias and start exercising your control over Facebook to stop driving division and actually, to quote you, build community and bring the world closer together, end quote, as you claim is Facebook's mission. My questions to both of you. A recent Harvard study found that President Trump was the single biggest source of voting-related misinformation in the run-up to the presidential election. Since the election, President Trump has only continued the lies on Twitter and Facebook, falsely claiming that he won re-election and that the election is being stolen from him. But the truth is, Joe Biden won the election, as major news networks and the Associated Press have confirmed. In response to President Trump's lies, you have, at most, added a warning label, while still allowing the president's misinformation to remain online. In response to questions from Senator Feinstein, you defended the labels, claiming they point people to a broader conversation around the election. I have serious questions about the effectiveness of these labels, particularly since President Trump and his allies continue to spread their lies. For both of you, what evidence do you have that these labels are effective in addressing President Trump's lies? response, please.
So, and I think Mark mentioned this earlier as well. We are doing a retrospective on the effectiveness of all of our actions through the election. We believe the labels point to, as you said, a broader conversation that people can see what's happening with the election and with the results. We don't want to put ourselves in a position of calling an election. That is not our job. So we're pointing to sources and pillars that have traditionally done this in the past, and that is the intention of the policy. That's the intention of the labeling system.
Mr. Zuckerberg?
Senator, we view the additional context that we put on posts as part of an overall response and effort to make sure that people have reliable information about the election. So we don't expect that it's just going to be when people are seeing a post that may be casting doubt on a legitimate form of voting or may have misinformation that we can correct and help people understand how they could really vote, for example. So that's why we put the Voter Information Center prominently on the top of Facebook and Instagram for months leading up to the election, and kept it up afterwards so people can see reporting on the results. As I mentioned in my opening statement, 140 million Americans visited that. I think this was the largest voting information campaign in the history of our country. So I think when taken together, these actions were quite strong of an effort to communicate accurate and reliable information to people at the times when they needed it about how they could vote in the election, encouraging them to vote, having confidence in the election system, knowing who and when the election had been called. It's just part of an overall system.
My time is running out, and so all of the information, the actual information, voter information you provide, that is good. But we're talking about all of these misinformation, actually outright lies that are put out by the president, and you have these labels. And I really have questions as to whether or not this kind of labeling, and I'm glad that at least Mr. Dorsey is determining whether these labels do anything to actually create a larger framework for discussion. I really seriously consider, doubt whether that is actually happening. Since I'm running out of time, I just wanted to get to, Donald Trump as president, you consider him newsworthy, so a lot of his posts get on whether they contain misinformation, especially on whether he won the election and COVID, you name it, the fraudulent elections that he alleges, et cetera. But I'm wondering, what are both of you prepared to do regarding Donald Trump's use of your platforms after he stops being president? Will he still be deemed newsworthy, and will he still get to use your platforms to spread his misinformation?
Senator, let me clarify my last answer. We are also having academics study the effect of all of our election measures, and they'll be publishing those results publicly. In terms of President Trump and moving forward, there are a small number of policies where we have exceptions for politicians under the principle that people should be able to hear what their elected officials are saying and candidates for office. But by and large, the vast majority of our policies have no newsworthiness or political exception. So if the president or anyone else is spreading hate speech or inciting violence, or posting content that delegitimizes the election or valid forms of voting, those will receive the same treatment as anyone else saying those things. And that will continue to be the case.
Remains to be seen. Mr. Dorsey?
So we do have a policy around public interest, where for global leaders, we do make exceptions in terms of whether if a tweet violates our terms of service, we leave it up, but we leave it up behind an interstitial, and people are not allowed to share that more broadly. So a lot of the sharing is disabled, with the exception of quoting it so that you can add your own conversation on top of it. So if an account suddenly is not a world leader anymore, that particular policy goes away.
Thank
So
you.
I am running out of time, but I have, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record a number of studies, particularly a November 1st, 2020 article in the Washington Post titled "Trump Allies Largely Unconstrained by Facebook's Rules Against Repeated Falsehoods Cement Pre-Election Dominance," a May 26, 2020 article in the Wall Street Journal titled "Facebook Executive Shutdown Efforts to Make the Site Less Divisive," 3 studies from Media Matters finding no anti-conservative bias on Facebook, and an article by Dr. Francesca Tripodi titled "No, Big Tech Isn't Silencing Conservatism." I would like to enter these items into the record.
Without objection, Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, each of you has founded an extraordinarily successful company, and they're both American companies. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't say congratulations. I'm very proud of the fact that it was American ingenuity that did this. I think we can also both agree that both Twitter and Facebook have enormous power as a result of your success. You're not companies, you're countries, at least in terms of power. I want to test a point of view here. I'm not sure I subscribe to it, but I want to get your thoughts on it. Mr. Dorsey, do you believe everything you read?
No.
Why not?
I think it's healthy to have skepticism about everything and have a mindset of verifying it and using as much information as possible to do so.
Do you have somebody on your staff who protects you from reading things that they think you shouldn't?
No.
Mr. Zuckerberg, do you believe everything you read?
No, Senator.
Why not?
Because a lot of things are incomplete or incorrect.
So you exercise your own judgment?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Do you have somebody on your staff whose job is to filter things that they think you should not be reading?
Senator, not externally, although I would hope that the teams that I work with internally do their best to make sure that the information that they're presenting me with are always accurate.
Okay. I want to, here is a point of view. I'm not sure I subscribe to it, but it is a legitimate point of view, I think, and I'd like to know your thoughts on it. You have both, and this is directed to each of you, you have both Democrats and Republicans upset with you. The Democrats are upset with you, this point of view holds, because they want you to publish, I'm not using that word as a term of art or science here with any special meanings. The Democrats want you to publish stuff on your platforms that they agree with, but they don't want you to publish stuff that they disagree with. And this point of view also holds that the Republicans are upset with you because they want you to publish things on your platforms that they agree with, but they don't want you to publish stuff on your platforms that they disagree with. What if we had a rule? What if your companies had a rule? This is a question, not a suggestion. What if your companies had a rule that said, okay, people aren't morons. I would like to treat people as they treat me. That is that I can read what I want to read and exercise my own good judgment about whether I choose to believe it. So here's the rule we're adopting. If you go on Twitter or Facebook, you can't bully people. You can't threaten people. Maybe this is a subset of both of those, but you can't commit a crime with your words, and you can't incite violence. But other than that, you can print any damn thing you want to, and we'll let our users judge. Give me your thoughts on that.
Those are generally the rules we have. I mean, our focus on these policies, Senator,
No, you don't, Mr. Dorsey. Excuse me for interrupting, but you're censoring right and left, trying to make both sides happy, and you're making neither side happy.
No, that's not the intention. The intention is
I know it's not the intention, but it's the result.
I can see why you might say that and why you might perceive that, and that's why we do think it's important that we add more transparency to how we moderate content, that we give more control to individuals to moderate their own content and focus on algorithms. But a lot of our policies are focused on making sure that people feel that they can express themselves in the first place and not driven away. Everything you mentioned about bullying, about harassment around illegal content or violence, incitement to violence, that is what our policies are, and that is
I know,
our
and excuse
intent.
me for interrupting, but my time's limited, and I want to hear from Mr. Zuckerberg. But you're not just doing that. You've started to censor content. Why not have both Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump able to say whatever they want to on your platform? Mr. Zucker, so long as they don't threaten, bully, incite violence, commit a crime. I'm not justifying the use of either Twitter or Facebook to hurt the Rohingyas. Mr. Zuckerberg, what are your thoughts on my suggestion? Get out of the censorship business, other than the exceptions I talked about.
Senator, in principle, I agree with what you are saying, although I think that there are more categories of harm than just the ones that you've mentioned. So, but I think the basic principle behind what you're saying is a definition of free expression that says that people should be able to share their opinions broadly, except if it's going to cause imminent or irreparable harm to another person, which now even the most ardent First Amendment supporters, agree that you shouldn't be able to yell fire in a crowded theater if there's not actually a fire, right? Because that could put people in the risk of imminent harm. So you mentioned terrorism, you mentioned child exploitation and bullying as forms of harm. And I think a lot of the debate is around what are other forms of harm. For example, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we've assessed that misinformation about COVID and treatments that could put people in additional risk of getting the disease or not seeking the right treatment if they have it, that those are also things that could cause imminent harm. We've taken the position that
Mr. Zuckerberg, let me interrupt you, and I really do apologize, but I'm going to be cut off in a second, and appropriately so. I'm not saying you're wrong by doing what you just described, but that makes you a publisher. And that creates problems with Section 230. And I just think one point of view is that at some point, we've got to trust people to use their own good judgment, to decide what they choose to believe and not believe, and not try to assume that we're smart and they're stupid, and that we can discern believable information and information that shouldn't be believed, but everybody else is too stupid to do it.
Okay.
I'm done. Thank you, Mr.
I
Chairman.
think you put your finger on a really, maybe the central issue, Senator Kennedy, is how do we let people make up their own minds without what they're saying, creating violence or threats to others. Very complicated endeavor. Senator Booker. Senator Booker?
Thank you. Chairman, can you hear me? Chairman?
Yes, and to our witnesses, we have 2 more senators and we'll be done, and I appreciate your patience. Senator Booker.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate listening to this hearing. I really want to bring just focus back to what I think is why we're here, which is the 2020 election. And I've been saying in this committee for many months now about the tragic consequences of us normalizing things that should express considerable outrage. There's not a person on this committee on either side that doesn't know who the next president of the United States will be. President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the president and vice president of the United States come January 20th. But what is going on right now is dangerous, and it is a threat to our democracy. For the first time in American history, we are seeing a sitting president of the United States make wild and baseless accusations that undermine the democratic process, that don't just delegitimize it. What the president of the United States is doing is trying to thwart our democracy. As we speak, Donald Trump is waging an all-out war on the truth and our democratic systems. And one of his weapons of choice in this disinformation war is social media, and specifically the 2 gentlemen here, their platforms, Twitter and Facebook. You have the tools to prevent him from weaponizing these platforms to degrade our democracy and our democratic institutions and to cause such damage that even after January 20th, it could be one of the first times that millions of Americans think and believe that this election was what is baselessly being charged by Donald Trump. And so let's be clear on what's happened. Donald Trump's shameful and shameless lies that are persisting about voter fraud and the outcome of this election were some of the most engaged content on social media in the days after the election. By one measure, during the week after the election, his posts on Facebook made up every single one of the top 10 most engaged posts in the United States, and 22 out of 25 of the top most engaged posts in our country. And his number 1 post, the top of them all, was a false declaration of victory. On Twitter, his tweet on falsely claiming victory was viewed by millions of users. This was and is not just a disinformation campaign by the President of the United States, but literally the most powerful person in our country doing an all-out assault on the constitutional ideal of a democracy that he was sworn to protect. So let's take a step back, because I think this would be bipartisan if we looked at what was happening in another country. If we saw, and I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I know how we come together on issues like this. If a strongman leader of a democracy had denied his loss in an election, in a democratic election, made consistent and constant baseless claims about fraud, if he fired military leaders while his foreign minister talked about a smooth transition of the defeated leader's next term, even potentially in jest, any government looking at this situation, including ours, would be putting out statements urging calm and calling for the peaceful transition of power, for the rule of law, for the honoring of democratic norms and traditions. And so we're seeing concrete consequences right now of President Trump's rhetoric. We are actually in the midst of the 4th largest mass casualty event in American history. This is not just something that should not be treated with calm and normalcy, but we all, people who believe in this country, should be standing up and talking about the consequences. We have his political appointee, the General Service Administrator, refusing to designate Joe Biden as president-elect and provide the transition team the resources mandated by federal law. It was not that long ago that the 9/11 Commission said that one of the things that undermined our ability to meet the terroristic threats to our country happened because of a transition that was undermined, or a transition that did not happen in the normal course. President Trump's actions since Election Day should shock all of us who care about the welfare of our democracy, who care about our norms. And I hope the platforms here can maintain the highest levels of vigilance. And so to the gentleman before us today, I'd like to ask specifically, have you taken any steps to modify your platform's algorithms to ensure that blatantly false election disinformation posted by election officials, and specifically the most powerful person in the United States, Donald Trump, isn't amplified, that his posts that might get a lot of interactions that are dead wrong don't somehow get boosted by your algorithms? If you could both respond to that as quickly as possible.
Senator, I'll go first, and I share your concern on this, and I think it's unfortunate that we had to put in place a policy around premature or false declarations of victory, but we had to do that, and we anticipated this back in September when we put the policy in place. And a lot of what we're trying to do is help distribute reliable information, which we attach both to posts on the topic by President Trump or any of the other candidates or elected officials who are talking on the subject. But more importantly, we put that reliable information, including about election results, at the top of Facebook and Instagram for everyone to see, and that supersedes what the algorithm or what newsfeed chooses to show.
I appreciate that. I just like to get Jack's. This is information I know. Jack, if you want to just respond on the algorithm, excuse Mr. Dorsey, do you want to respond about the algorithms too? Do you have specific measures that you're taking to prevent your algorithms from boosting false content?
Yeah, so many of the labels did change how the algorithms amplify content.
And then, President Trump right now is spreading dangerous misinformation about our electoral process. It's going on right now. And maybe if you guys, if you gentlemen would just cogently, through this process, this ongoing process right now, are there steps you will be taking that you have not already delineated as we are going into what could be very dangerous waters, unprecedented waters in this country? Is there any additional steps that you will be taking right now in the coming days or weeks to stop the further amplification and undermining of our democracy? We are heading potentially, depending upon the behavior of a president who's shown himself to be erratic. Are there steps that you were prepared to take in the coming days and weeks to address this misinformation that we are seeing is coming in an unrelenting manner?
Senator, yes, this is unfortunately an eventuality that we planned for, and we've taken a number of steps, not just including the fact-checking program that we've set up broadly, but we stopped recommending all civic and political groups as an example because of the risk of misinformation or harm growing there. We've temporarily paused all political ads because of a risk of potential abuse or kind of inflaming tension or potential unrest or violence. And there are a number of other steps that we've taken like this as well, that we've done in other countries when there are risks of civil unrest, and that we've shown have worked. So I'd be happy to follow up in more detail on all of the steps that we're taking there.
Oh, thank you. Your team has been helpful. Mr. Dorsey, any new steps that you want to give me? And I'm now treading on the indulgence of the chairman, if you could be really cogent. Any new steps?
We're going to continue to remain vigilant around our enforcement of civil integrity. I think it's really important that we stay agile and that we learn. So we need to learn about the effectiveness of this work and how to carry it forward.
Right, and if the chairman would indulge me in one more sort of question to Mr. Zuckerberg. I was really pleased that the group Stop the Steal, which was a group formed on Facebook with disinformation, trying to delegitimize the election. I was grateful that you all suspended that account after 24 hours. But I'm concerned about what lessons you've learned, because clearly outside groups like the Center for Countering Digital Hate flagged that group's posts containing calls to violence hours before Facebook did. And I'm wondering what you all have learned about speed. There's an old saying that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting its pants on. What does Facebook really factor in terms of speed and trying to combat surges of disinformation about this group? And maybe another example, an additional sort of addendum to that question, Mr. Zuckerberg. Mr. Bannon, Twitter, for example, permanently suspended Mr. Bannon's Twitter account. It suspended his show's Twitter account after he made horrendous steps about acts of violence against Dr. Fauci and FBI Director Wray. But not only, I guess I'm just simply asking, why would Facebook not take the similar steps and similar stand? So, Mr. Zuckerberg, very cogently, could you talk about that speed issue? And then when your platforms diverge, I'm really wondering why one platform in Twitter saw that as a standard to remove, but you all have did not follow in that decision.
Thanks, Senator. I'm happy to address both of those. On speed, you're certainly right that that's important. And part of what we focus on is figuring out which types of messages or things are going to go viral quickest. Because it's not just about trying to get to everything within, in 5 hours, for example. It's actually much more important to get to the harms that are going viral quickly within an hour, even if some things that are probably not going to get much distribution at all might be deprioritized for a little bit longer. So I think making sure that we stay on top of what are the hashtags, what are the groups, what are the messages, who are the bad actors who are trying to spread this content. And as we see the threat evolving, we are typically able to evolve and move faster as well. So we're very focused on that.
Thank you very much. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask you I just want to give you an amen, Chairman Grant. The second part of that question I'd love to get on the record, but I just want to say to you, you mentioned earlier, and I know you said that Chairman Graham will be chairman again, but I think you really said something really important earlier about the effects of social media platforms on our kids. I can cite many studies, like the University of Pittsburgh, who said that kids are on social media have about twice the rates of eating disorders and image concerns. I just would really say, and I know that two gentlemen there would welcome the opportunity to come and discuss that perhaps with other experts, but there's something really going on in terms of the self-esteem, well-being, and even flourishing of our children who are deeply affected by these platforms. Whether you want to use a technical term like addiction or not, there's enough evidence that these platforms and children's engagement on them is causing heightened levels of a sort of a deleterious effect on their well-being. And I'd love it if we could do such a hearing sometime soon.
We will follow up into the Every Patient Senator Blackburn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last but certainly not least.
That is correct, and I appreciate that. And even though my colleague from New Jersey went twice his time, I am going to begin.
These are Senate minutes, yeah.
Yes, they're Senate minutes. I will agree with my colleagues who have talked about the impact on children. The distribution of information that damages women and children, that leads to violence against women and children, human trafficking, the utilization of these platforms by pedophiles. This is something that we are going to continue to work on. When I was in the House, we passed legislation to put more tools in the hands of local law enforcement to fight this, but you all at these social media platforms are going to have to do your part to work with us on this to protect our children. I will also say that we're keeping an eye, and with each of you yesterday, I talked about your financial components. Square, there for Mr. Dorsey, and Libra with Mr. Zuckerberg, and the application of these components to your sites. We're talking about 2020 elections, but we're also looking ahead to how we clean up some of what transpired in the before the 2022 elections. I think it's fair to say, too, that you all probably are now fully aware that there's great frustration with Americans and with this committee, with the way you act invincible, the way your employees act as if you're the invincible gods of the Silicon Valley. Facebook and Twitter don't get to be the last word in what counts as real news in this country, even though you're beginning to conduct yourself as news publishers and distributors. My colleagues and I have asked you all repeatedly through the years for greater transparency and to accept responsibility. You've chosen to do neither. So it is going to be up to us to change existing law and to hold you to account on behalf of the American people. Section 230, the reforms that we're going to put in place will take away this liability shield that you've turned into an opaque wall that you and your content moderators, whether they're algorithmic or human beings or a combination, are hiding behind. And the Online Freedom and Viewpoint Diversity Act, I thank Chairman Graham and Chairman Wicker for working with me on this. This is set up for a markup in this committee on Thursday. And Mr. Zuckerberg, you were stating earlier that we needed to put some definition in place. We're going to do that. We're going to take away nebulous language, and we're going to be specific, unlawful, inciting personal harm, inciting terrorism. We're going to do that and clear that up for you. Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook is more like a government than a traditional company, is a statement that you have made. There's a lot of power in that for you. So yes or no on a couple of questions here. Does Facebook routinely censor a user's account at the behest of a foreign government? Yes or no?
Senator, I'm not sure if there's anything in particular you're referring to, but in general,
well, there
don't
is
censor.
something in particular that I'm referring to, and I'll answer it. Yes, you've done that. You have 60 million users in Vietnam. Of course, this is a communist regime. Under the orders of the Vietnamese government, did Facebook shut down and ban the account of a Vietnamese dissident because he criticized the government's land policy? Yes or no?
Senator, I'm not familiar with all the details of that, but I believe that we may have done that, and that in general we try to follow the local laws of different countries.
And you kept him off for 3 months. In Turkey, does Facebook have an anti-blasphemy policy where it will take down photos of the Prophet Muhammad if the Turkish government orders it to do so?
Senator, again, we don't have a policy against that, but
well,
we
the answer is
yes. follow. Well, we follow local laws in
the answer
the
is
countries
yes.
where we operate.
In Russia, under pressure from the Russian government, did Facebook take down a post advertising the rally in support of the dissident Alexei Navalny? The answer is yes. I'll help you with that. Do you believe it's Facebook's duty to comply with state-sponsored censorship so it can keep operating, doing business, and selling ads in that country?
Senator, in general, we try to comply with the laws in every country where we operate and do business.
Okay, and I think that you prioritize profit over principle when you look at these countries, and also in communist China, which they have banned their citizens from you. You can't operate there. And in China, Twitter, you have an opponent there. You've got a knockoff, Weibo, that is a Chinese Communist Party-owned company. But your companies, even though they're banned there, you're still trying to do business in those countries. Mr. Dorsey, does Twitter do business with Huawei?
I don't believe so, but we can follow up.
Oh, I can answer it for you, sir. You helped launch Huawei's Mate 3 Pro 5G, and it is featured on Twitter's marketing page website. How about Alibaba? You do business with Jack Ma's company with their links to the Chinese Communist Party?
If by business you mean allowing people to advertise on a platform.
Your answer is yes. Mr. Zuckerberg, are you aware that last year China's top internet regulator agreed to spend over $800,000 for the communist mouthpiece, the People's Daily? And they did this so that they could advertise and promote China to the American people on Facebook. The point of all of this, and the answer to that, Mr. Zuckerberg, whether you're aware or not, is you probably are, and you know that what they're doing is gaining access to this market. This is why we're going to keep a real close watch over what you all are doing with Libra and what you are doing with Square, because we see what has happened. It's important for us to protect people and to protect human rights. And your election, let me move to election content and that monitoring, because we do have concerns about some of the things that happened there. Mr. Zuckerberg, let me ask you this. Have you heard of the Trump Accountability Project?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, that is a project that is an attempt to blacklist Americans who have served in the Trump administration and to prohibit them from gaining future employment. Now, in communist China, in Putin's Russia, in totalitarian states, the government regularly will issue a blacklist on their enemies. Enemies of the state are banned from getting a job, and if their names fall on the blacklist, they're out. Now, this seems disturbing that it would be happening here in this country. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, do you agree with me there is seriously something wrong with an un-American blacklist tarring people from future employment simply because they belong to a different political party?
Senator, I generally agree that people should not be discriminated against because of a political belief.
Okay, that is a positive step. Now, on Facebook, I wrote in a post, and I'm quoting, "The Trump Accountability Project is the epitome of the cancel culture. Our nation has long benefited from robust political debate, and this effort to silence those who support our president is vile." As you can tell from this statement, nothing was said about the election or the results, either directly or indirectly. But somehow I got slapped with your elections flag sticker. So what each of you need to realize, and you've heard it time and again today, you say you don't keep list. Obviously, you have list, because there are some of us who are regularly censored and called down by your content moderators. Do we want to see these lists? Yes. How have you built these lists? We want to know. I would remind each of you, you are a Title I service. You are an information service. You are to be the new public square. But what you are doing with your power that you have derived, because federal law gave you the ability to stand up and grow without being hit by lawsuits, you have used this power to run amok. You have used it to silence conservatives. You have used it to build your list. You have used this power to act like you hold all the power, that you can make these decisions. You have driven this cancel culture because you have not called to account your moderators. You have refused to take responsibility for your employees and their actions, so thereby reining you in on the issues of privacy, data security, content moderation, liability protections, defining who is a publisher in the virtual space. That is up to us, because you have proven you do not have the will, the strength, the ability, and you will not accept the responsibility to do it for yourselves. I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackburn. To the two witnesses, you made it through. I think you hopefully will understand a little bit better about where the committee's at and our concerns. I want to thank you for appearing. I wish we could do it in person, but I could understand why we had to do it remotely. We will have more hearings coming up in the next Congress, I'm sure, to try to find ways to modify 230 to deal with some of the issues that were brought before the committee. I just want to thank you both and just say that you have been hugely successful in ways probably beyond your own imagination. And we've got problems around your platforms that have to be dealt with, and we will do it hopefully collaboratively. The bottom line is we want to make these platforms better. We want to continue to grow this part of our society responsibly. And right now, without regulation or without lawsuit, is pretty much becoming the Wild Wild West. And I appreciate both of you for being willing to try to find ways to come up with systems that will ensure more transparency, more choice, and more confidence. And
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
If I may just add my thanks to the witnesses and also to you for having this hearing. I think there's one certainty here, which is that Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey will be back. They will be back in the next session of Congress. I hope that joining them will be Google and Amazon and others who should be held similarly accountable.
And to these two companies, thank you for stepping up to the plate, and to the other companies, you need to be here also.
And I again, thank them, and we need to have greater accountability by reducing the shield. It's now nearly complete, and I want to thank you, Senator Graham, for working with me on the Internet Act. A number of our colleagues have raised the problem of child sexual abuse material. Best way to counter it is to act. If we really are serious about all this rhetoric and the jumble of grievances that we've heard, let's begin the journey with a single step. We can do it through the Internet Act. It's on the floor of the United States Senate, having been reported unanimously out of this committee. Let's have a vote.
Agree. Change is going to come. Thank you. The hearing is adjourned.